Now's the time for us to start doing some declarations inside this smart contract. By this point, we've imported everything we need from OpenZeppelin, the ERC721 token, Ownable, and the counters smart contract. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create these declarations to use these imports that we've created. Okay, to do that, let's start by defining the counters. These counters are going to let us regulate the number of NFTs that are going to be minted in our metaverse. So we're going to keep track of the current amount of NFTs so we can actually manage and control the number of NFTs that are actually minted. We will now need to use the counters library. Let me tell you exactly how we're going to do that. The way we do that is we establish using counters. So we're establishing the counters library for counters.counter. So we've established that. And then we continue that by establishing counters.counter. And from there, we do the following. We use a private variable, supply, private supply. That way, we're going to be able to count and regulate the supply of NFTs through the use of counters. Now, we need to establish the total number of NFTs that are available. Okay, so let's set it right now. Let me first comment it through. But I can also establish a restriction or a limit on the number of NFTs can be created, as in how many can be created. To do that, let's define it as a uint public max supply. The max supply is going to be 100. That's what we're going to define as our maximum supply, 100. Okay, at this point, if the users are going to be creating NFTs in our metaverse, we're going to actually add a cost associated with actually putting an NFT in our metaverse. That is, you can't just randomly create NFTs. There's going to be a cost associated with creating these NFTs in the metaverse. So let's define that now. Let's first comment it out. Cost to be paid for each NFT token. So we're defining that here. Let's set it right now. So what does that cost? Let's first define it. uint 256, it's a public variable cost, and we're going to set the cost for this at 1 Ether. Now this is just what I chose now. You can set it for any other price, 0.1, 0.2, or whatever you wish to set it at, you can. Also, because we're deploying in Ethereum, I'm setting it as Ether. It's important to note that if you deploy this on Polygon, you don't have to change this. It could actually work the same way if you're actually deploying on Polygon. Okay, what do we need? Well, let's define it. We're going to store data about the owner and the property that each owner has. So let's define as owner and its properties in the metaverse. Okay, perfect. So if I'm George and I have 4 properties, I need to define that somewhere. So the way I'll do that is I go mapping with my address and then to the buildings, because I'm actually own this building. And that's how we're going to define it. And we can put it NFT owners. That's the name of this mapping, NFT owners. Now, this building is an array that's actually going to have a list of the buildings. And at this moment, there's nothing in it. So let's define that. Let's establish that it's metaverse buildings. And this will be a data structure. So let's define that here. Struct, which will be called building. Okay, so what will this data structure have inside? It's going to have a string, which will have the name of the structure of the NFT token. It will have the following parameters too. We're going to have the width. We're going to have int8 a height. Then we're going to go for the depth. Let's set that there. Because the object is a 3-dimensional object, we will also need to establish the position. So let's establish the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. And all of this will be regarding a cube. If we want to have a figure with more dimensions, we would need to define those further. We would have to configure that here, but for this specific purpose, we just need these 3, width, height, and depth. That's what we really need for these metaverse buildings. Finally, what we're going to do is a list of the buildings that are in this metaverse. It's very important for us to keep track of which are the metaverse buildings we have, and that's actually what we're going to build in here. So to do that, what we need to establish then is we need to create an array building, and it's going to be public, and it's going to be called buildings. Okay. Now, by this point, we've imported the smart contracts we needed. We know pretty much everything we set established, but we need something essential at this point, which is the constructor. The constructor is what's going to enable us to create the NFT tokens that we need. So I'll add it right here, constructor, and we establish it by writing constructor, and now it is an ERC721 token. And now we need to define two parameters, the name of the token, I'll just call it Meta, and the symbol, let me just come up with MJG for Metaverse Johann George. You can call it whatever you want, it's up to you. And we will then complete here the full constructor. I hit save, and you'll notice that the error message that was on line 10 is no longer there. Why? Because we have established the constructor properly. And remember, these are going to be the buildings that we will actually be represented as NFTs inside the metaverse.